Hello, I'm Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute fellow at the University of California, Irvine. Here to bring you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas war. It is currently the evening of January 27, 2024 in the United States, the morning of January 28, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, after several days in which both Israel and Hamas have scaled down the reports regarding a possible hostage deal, today the New York Times reported that under U.S. auspices, the conclusion of such a deal in the coming weeks is much closer than has been recently published. According to reports, the deal has been drafted after intensive negotiations and involved pressure from the United States, Qatar, and Egypt on all sides, i.e. on Israel and Hamas, creating a framework for talks in the meeting that is scheduled to occur tomorrow and that will likely last more than 24 hours, that is going to occur in Paris. This meeting is going to be attended by CIA Director William Barnes, Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed Athani, Egyptian Head of Intelligence Abbas Kamel, the head of the Mossad Dadi Barnea, and the head of the Shabak Ronen Bar. According to the report, the deal includes a 30-day pause in which the hostages who are women, elderly, and injured will be released. During that time, the next phase will be negotiated, and possibly an additional pause of another 30 days, a total of 2 months, in which male hostages and soldiers will be released as well. Humanitarian aid will also enter the Gaza Strip. This is all part of the initial framework. According to the reports, what has not been finalized is the key of Palestinian prisoners that will be released, i.e. how many Palestinian prisoners will be released in exchange for each hostage. In the previous truce, it was 3 Palestinian prisoners for each hostage. According to all the reports, and according to what Hamas has said, and according to how it seems, the key is going to be a lot larger this time. The latest leak stated that possibly be 100 Palestinian prisoners for each hostage. However, according to this report, that key has not been finalized yet, as well as there's still lacking Hamas's approval for the fact that they are not going to get what the group has demanded, which is an all-out ceasefire and an end to the war and idea of withdrawal. According to previous leaks in the last several days, Israel has agreed to have an IDF redeployment within the Gaza Strip, i.e. pulling the IDF out of specific centers of Palestinian towns, however not a complete withdrawal. According to the report in the New York Times, the Hamas may hope and Qatar may try to sell Hamas on the idea that if there is in fact a 2-month truce, Israel will not be able to diplomatically reignite the war after that with the same scale, and in that case it is in Hamas's benefit to agree to a 2-month truce and then see if the war develops. That remains to be seen. According to this report, there is cautious optimism regarding a hostage deal, much more than has been reported in the last couple of days. Moving on to the fighting in the Gaza Strip. There were rockets and mortars sent from the Gaza Strip targeting the southern parts of Israel today. These targeted primarily the areas of Sderot, Ivim, and Nir Am. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, there were few reports regarding what has happened in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. Most of the reports suggested that there were continuous bombings that occurred and different IDF raids. However, that compared to previous days, the northern parts of the Gaza Strip were relatively calm in the last 24 hours. Moving on to the central parts of the Gaza Strip, in the Al-Nuseirat refugee camp, several bombing rounds were reported. In one of these, a journalist, Ahmed El-Rawag, was reportedly killed. This makes 120 journalists that were killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began. In the past, Israel has published information about the different journalists who were killed, sometimes showing evidence that they were Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives. In this case, Israel made no comment regarding this journalist's death, at least in the last 24 hours. According to different reports, this makes the 120th journalist who was killed, making this war between Israel and Hamas the deadliest war for journalists since many different reports began after World War II. Other news regarding the central parts of the Gaza Strip, the IDF continues to hold the Netzarim or Nuseirat corridor, that is the corridor that blocks and cuts off the northern parts of the Gaza Strip from the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, and there were several gun battles reported throughout the last several days, and reportedly today there was also some violence reported around this corridor, and there was more fighting reported around El Bureij and El Maghazi refugee camps as well. In the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, in Han Yunis, IDF commando units are continuing to deepen their hold in the western parts of the city, with ground units also transmitting coordinates of Hamas operatives that are then targeted by IDF Air Force for different attacks. In other battles, tank fire was reported throughout different parts of the western parts of Han Yunis after RPGs were launched towards different IDF troops. In a specific raid, the IDF reported uncovering a massive weapons warehouse with substantial amounts of guns, clips, RPGs, sophisticated camera equipment, as well as spy equipment and diving gear, reportedly all belonging to different Hamas units. Other news related to the Gaza Strip. The IDF today presented evidence to the political establishment in Israel that the civilian administration of Hamas is beginning to regain control over the northern and central parts of the Gaza Strip. According to reports, the IDF explicitly stated to the political establishment in Israel that the lack of decision regarding the day after plan, i.e. what is going to happen when the IDF pulls out of these centers in the northern parts and central parts of the Gaza Strip, are not only forestalling the military victory, but also actively harming it, since the civilian side of Hamas, that includes municipal services, mayors, different providers of social services, and other different activities, are the only ones who are attempting to take charge of the areas. In other words, the IDF is saying, as the military is gradually pulling out of the city centers and the different regions of the northern parts and the central parts of the Gaza Strip, the power vacuum that is being created because there is no strategy regarding who is going to govern this territory is leading to the fact that the only ones who are capable of assuming any governing role is the Hamas administration that has been in power for years. And thus, we've seen police officers, other providers of social services, different government employees who are all coming out of hiding and actually starting to assume government roles, and the IDF is warning the Israeli establishment about that. Other news, there were more evacuations of Palestinians seen from western Khan Yunis towards the humanitarian corridors of the El Mawasi area today. The IDF claimed that tens of thousands of people have evacuated from the different ongoing fighting zones in western Khan Yunis in the last 24 hours. Regarding casualties, no IDF soldiers were reported killed in the last 24 hours, and thus the number of IDF soldiers that were killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began remains at 222. Close to 1,300 IDF soldiers reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began. The Palestinian Health Ministry is reporting 174 Palestinians that were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians that were killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 26,257. 64,797 Palestinians are reported injured in the Gaza Strip, and several thousand are still reportedly buried under the rubble, missing and presumed dead. Moving on to the humanitarian situation, after in the last several days there have been Israeli protests, both of families of hostages and different organizations, in the Kerem Shalom crossing, i.e. the crossing that is between Israel and the Gaza Strip, blocking humanitarian aid from entering. In a statement today, Prime Minister Netanyahu was asked about these protests. He stated, and I quote, "Without minimal humanitarian aid, we will not be able to complete our task, finish the war, and achieve our goals. The Chief of Staff of the military gave an order to deal with this because we need to supply this with, i.e. the Gaza Strip, with minimal requirements." The group organizing the protest, which calls itself Order 9, which is a paraphrase of different military orders, stated that the aid trucks are not humanitarian aid, but rather providing oxygen for Hamas, adding that there are other ways to deliver aid to the Gaza Strip. In turn, the IDF today announced that following the Hague injunctions that were leveled at Israel yesterday, the IDF will not be able to continue to allow the protests to stop aid trucks from entering the Gaza Strip, i.e. what the IDF is saying is, as a result of the injunction, one of the injunctions that was leveled by the ICJ, saying that Israel has to allow humanitarian aid to flow in, the fact that until now, the police forces in Israel have allowed these protests to continue and effectively block the entrance of aid trucks to the Gaza Strip, the IDF is saying this can no longer be tolerated. It remains to be seen what will actually be done. Regarding in the Gaza Strip itself, the humanitarian situation, substantial fighting was reported and intensifying around the Al Amal hospital in Khan Yunis. In addition, the Palestinian Health Ministry reported that the fuel situation in the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis, which is the biggest hospital, is going to run out in 4 days. It also reported that 150 Palestinians have been buried in makeshift burials around the hospital due to the IDF sieges. Other news related to the humanitarian situation, weather conditions and ongoing substantial rainfall has severely exacerbated the humanitarian crisis in the different refugee camps. Different footage is coming out of the refugee camps showing most of them completely flooded, and this is obviously exacerbating the situation, not only in terms of the actual living conditions of Palestinians, but specifically with regards to access to clean water and different hygiene situations. Other news regarding the UNRWA case. Yesterday it was reported that UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency that deals with Palestinians, has fired 12 of its workers as a result of Israel presenting evidence that these workers actually participated in the October 7th attack. After that, the United States stated that it was going to freeze all its money transfers of donations to UNRWA pending the investigation. Since then, today, a series of countries continue to also announce that they're going to halt their money transfers to the organization. Germany was the first. Germany is the second largest country after the United States. The United States gives $344 million per year to UNRWA. Germany gives $202 million. After them, Canada, Australia, Finland, Italy, the United Kingdom, Switzerland, and Holland all announced that they are suspending all their funding for UNRWA pending this investigation. Philip Lazzarini, the head of UNRWA, protested very strongly against the freezing of all these monies, stating that they will make it almost impossible for the organization to function, and specifically in the current situation in the Gaza Strip, the situation is going to become that much more dire. Amidst this, the Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz stated that many of UNRWA employees are in fact Hamas members that harbor terror activity and help Hamas survive. He added, and I quote, "The UN must immediately fire the heads of UNRWA and launch a transparent, independent inquiry of all that has transpired in UNRWA-Hamas," i.e. stating that UNRWA and Hamas are one and the same. Hamas in turn condemned UNRWA's firing of the employees, stating that the organization is supposed to remain neutral in the conflict and not adhere to Zionist charges. Moving on to the West Bank, I will add that in the last 24 hours, the United Nations has not put out its regular reports, nor have there been reports of the Palestinian Red Crescent or different IDF reports, so some of the information about the West Bank is very sparse. IDF activity was reported in the Zawata area in the western Nablus and in the Beta area in southern Nablus. According to different reports on the ground, substantial IDF forces were seen entering these different villages, presumably to carry out either raids, arrests, or look for weaponry. In addition, in Beit Rima and in Beit Hassana near Ramallah, there were also different raids reported. 20 Palestinians are reported arrested in the West Bank in the last 24 hours. We're moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon. There were continuous rocket barrages sent from Lebanon targeting northern parts of Israel today. Several barrages were sent towards the Shlomi area in the western Galilee. Rockets also targeted the areas of Dishon, Iftach, Ramon Naftali, and Malachia in the upper Galilee. Hezbollah stated that it fired the Falk 1 missile in at least 2 rounds. These are substantially heavier missiles, for the first time Hezbollah is using them since the war began. Hezbollah also launched several drones towards the upper Galilee. However, they were shot down by the IDF over Lebanon. In total, Hezbollah claimed firing 4 different barrages of rockets and different rounds in the last 24 hours. Regarding IDF retaliations, IDF announced that it attacked different Hezbollah military outposts as well as a military compound in the Bleda and Meruchin areas, as well as terrorism infrastructure in the village of Ita Ashab. Al Manar in turn reported a series of IDF attacks in the El Avona village, and El Miadin also reported IDF drones attacked in the area in Anakora. Related to this, IDF announced today the completion of an intensive training campaign of its northern units, making them ready for the order should war erupt in Lebanon. Amidst this, LBCI, which is Lebanon's broadcasting service, stated today that an Arab country informed Hezbollah that its intelligence units have picked up that Israel is going to launch a massive campaign into Lebanon in the coming days, where this may be related to this training campaign that the IDF announced it completed. Unclear. No other reports were made. Moving on to some of the regional developments, the Saudi Al-Hadith network reported that a Houthi drone was intercepted today by the United States in the Bab el-Mandab Straits. It was not reported anywhere what this drone was targeting or if it in fact did hit any ships. Other news, a member of the Houthi political bureau, Muhammad al-Bathini, stated today that, and I quote, "The military operations against Israel will continue until the end of the aggressions in Gaza. British warships and commercial ships have become a legitimate target for Yemen after the attacks against it, i.e. the attacks of the coalition against Yemen. We hope that the battle will be direct between us and the Americans," i.e. what the Houthis are saying is that while they are prepared to expand the conflict, they hope, quote-unquote, that the conflict remains between the Houthis and the United States, and in this case the UK as well. In other news, the Houthis reported that the coalition's attack in the last several weeks also damaged the main port used to export oil in the area, the Ras Isa port, in the Hudaydah region. According to reports, it was badly damaged. There was no confirmation made about this by the coalition. However, the coalition did attack several different targets in the El Hudaydah area. Moving on to the political and general trends, thousands of protesters took to the streets in Israel in different rallies organized by the family members of hostages that are held in the Gaza Strip. These called on the government to immediately come to an agreement with Hamas and release the hostages. Other protests also called for the government to resign amidst the failures of October 7th and how the war is being run. In addition to this, during the Palestinian evacuations from Khan Yunis, several videos came out showing Palestinians who were protesting and chanting "Down with Hamas." This comes amidst reports from the last several days in which we've seen protests break out in Deir el-Balach as well as in different parts of Khan Yunis, with protesters in Gaza not only protesting the IDF and the war, also chanting against Yahya Sinwar and against Hamas, which is a rising trend in the Gaza Strip. Amidst these protests, Prime Minister Netanyahu today gave a press conference and answered several questions. One of these was about the protests of the different family members of hostages. He stated that while he understands the family members and their protests, their actions in fact only strengthen Hamas's demands. His statements were widely condemned by the family members of the hostages. In addition, Prime Minister Netanyahu also rejected calls to establish an independent inquiry commission following the events of October 7th, stating that all commissions and inquiries will happen after the war. He was also asked about the recorded statements in which he was heard condemning Qatar and calling them basically a state supporter of Hamas. He stated that he does not retract anything that he said about Qatar, adding, "They host and fund Hamas. It will be beneficiary to apply pressure on them." Other news, the Wall Street Journal today reported about the deteriorating Israeli-Egyptian relationship. Egypt reportedly considered recalling its ambassador after Israel's statements in the ICJ, where Israel stated that it is happy to allow as much humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip as possible, but the problem is Egypt is forestalling it. According to other reports, Egypt is also infuriated by Israeli accusations regarding different aspects of the war, and is also very fearful of Israeli plans for Rafah, i.e., is Israel going to expand its military campaign towards Rafah and the Philadelphia line as well, stating that this may lead to a mass evacuations of Palestinians to Egypt. According to the report in the Wall Street Journal, Israel has continuously been pressuring Egypt to accept substantial amounts of Palestinians, even on a temporary basis, in order to allow Israel to operate in Rafah, and Egypt has categorically rejected this, and that the relationship between the sides is the worst it has been in 45 years. Moving on to the future of the Gaza Strip, Israeli finance minister and leader of religious Zionism, Bezalel Smotrich, today was asked in an interview about the future of the Gaza Strip. He stated, and I quote, "There will be a military government in Gaza, and it will be responsible for civilian matters as well," i.e., Minister Smotrich, who's not only the Minister of Finance, he's also a minister in the Ministry of Defense, is stating that, contrary to what Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying, his vision is that there will not only be a military government, it will be the only governing body in Gaza that will be responsible for civilian aspects as well. Prime Minister Netanyahu, in his interview, was also asked about future settlements in the Gaza Strip. He stated, and I quote, "Our policy about the day after is determined by the expanded cabinet. Ministers and members of Knesset have different views. My opinion against this has not changed." Other news, the New York Times published a wide report citing diplomats from 10 different countries involved in developing plans to end the war and for the day after plan. Among those that have already been published, such as the normalization with Saudi Arabia, in exchange for irreversible plans to a two-state solutions, others involve deep reform in the Palestinian Authority, preparing it to assume control of the Gaza Strip, possibly relegating Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas to a symbolic role while transferring actual authority to a new prime minister or president, as well as other plans for Arab peacekeeping force that may be stationed in the Gaza Strip. According to the report, the Biden administration is trying to combine these different plans. However, it is still increasingly frustrated by Israel's categorical refusal to actually discuss what is going to happen in the day after, and continuously saying what will not happen, but not actually entertaining which of these plans will be put forth. And this is related to that report I gave at the beginning, that the IDF is also saying to the Israeli establishment the fact that no plan is actually in place for who's going to govern the Gaza Strip, what's going to happen as the IDF pulls out of different centers, is starting to lead to the fact that Hamas is effectively beginning to regain at least civilian control in the different parts of the Gaza Strip. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.